Okay, so I call the meeting to order. It's 6:04. Natural Resources Committee on June 9th, 2021. And so we need to adopt the agenda. So is there anything anybody wants to move to new business or discussion items from any place else or that stuff?
I know
I had talked about adding the invasive species stuff, but then Pete pointed out that we have rather a full agenda. So I'm just going to wait to the end and remind us all that we need to do that because I totally flaked out on that. So,
and we can share whatever work you guys have done already under communications.
The thing Chris did was awesome.
Wow, I'm blown away.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you help with that, Samantha?
I have a question. If it's a good point to add something now for next meeting's agenda to talk about street tree inventory strategy and,
sure,
developing that. So for next time, but
yeah, right before we adjourn the meeting,
we'll agenda items down there at the end of the meeting. So we should definitely bring that up. In addition, Dee Dee, we're going to give Dee Dee her award at the July meeting. And she did earn that.
Yep.
The Heritage Tree Hero Award. And we nominated her and Doug Neely nominated her. So I will get a hold of Doug to make sure he comes to the meeting too.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a second thing. Good to know. Great.
Public comment. Is there anybody from the public here who wishes to say something?
We have William Foster.
I'm here, but I have no comment. I'm just curious to watch. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming.
Sure.
So that gets us to our new business discussion item. And the big one is the Oregon City Tree Recovery Program.
Great. So I'm going to introduce Kelly Reed. Our planner has been working on the tree recovery program, and she's going to get us up to speed on where we're at so far with that program and policy. So take it away. Let me make Kelly a co-host.
Thanks, Pete. Well, I'm glad I didn't put together special slides because I wouldn't have been able to access them anyway, I guess.
I know. I was like,
I figured we could just look at the agenda materials, which I have on the web, so that's perfect.
Okay.
So I'm Kelly Reed. I'm a planner with Oregon City. I've been with the city for, almost close to 9 years now. So thanks for having me. I've been kind of spearheading some of the tree recovery program work. As you know, we had a really severe winter storm in February that took down a lot of trees throughout the city, limbs and entire trees. And as you also know, we have a decent sized tree mitigation fund that is made up of money that developers and individuals pay when they remove a tree and don't replace it on site. That goes for street trees or trees related to new development. So over the years, we've amassed a good fund for tree mitigation, and we use that to plant trees throughout the city. For the last, I think, maybe 6 years, we've used that funding for the Friends of Trees program to get street trees planted throughout the city. And so, we're using that fund now to try to replace a lot of the trees that were lost due to the ice storm. So we had a lot of trees that came down on their own. We had a lot of trees that were damaged enough to the extent that they were going to die or dying or were very hazardous. And so a lot of property owners have removed those trees, as well as sorry, you might hear my kids in the background eating dinner, as well as city right-of-way and city property trees and parks that the city has had to remove. And I think we have a lot of trees out there that have been damaged, and property owners aren't really sure if they need to come down, or if they're going to be just fine, or if they're hazardous. So we're trying to kind of address all of that through a tree recovery program, and with your help. So I really appreciate the input that you've given so far. And what we're looking for tonight is just to kind of present to you the draft program before it goes to City Commission next week. So the City Commission agenda for next week has a resolution that would officially kind of adopt the tree recovery program, and it would officially kind of formalize our policy of waiving tree code compliance for trees that came down in the ice storm. So if someone's street tree was damaged or came down in February, anytime through October, so you have time to kind of deal with it, the city will not require a street tree removal permit and will not require you to replant that street tree if you don't want to. That said, we strongly encourage replanting of that street tree, and we have the funding to help incentivize people to do so for those folks who want to. So the resolution would formalize that policy, kind of the waiving of the tree code for this limited period of time for trees that came down in the ice storm. And also on the agenda next week for City Commission is a contract with Friends of Trees for about $160,000 over the next 2 years that would allow us to plant up to 415 trees through the Friends of Trees planting programs throughout the city. So we'd be prioritizing folks who are submitting their information online and letting us know that their trees came down. They'll have first priority for Friends of Trees. If we still have some left over, which I would imagine we would, then we would kind of just release that to be available to anyone who wants a tree, either a street tree or a tree in their front yard, can get a tree through that program. So those are, a homeowner pays $35. The city covers the rest. Friends of Trees handles all of the logistics and helps with species selection, and organizes the volunteers. They have a really great program, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. So along with the planting of the 415 trees through Friends of Trees planting, we are also including in that contract a couple of pruning workshops. One of the workshops might be more of a tree education workshop. I think we're still scoping that, so we're leaving it a little bit up in the air so that we have a little bit of flexibility to know whether the community would benefit more from a tree education workshop or from pruning workshops, or a combination. So we have those, and the pruning would be for young trees. So it's done from the ground, not, from a ladder or anything. And so Friends of Trees would be educating folks about how to prune, when to prune, and then also be doing some pruning work along with that workshop. The third part of the piece of the recovery program is offering arborist advice. The city does not have a city arborist on staff, but we would contract with an arborist or multiple arborists to send them out to do a tree risk assessment for larger trees where the homeowners are really uncertain of if that tree really should come down, if it sustained damage, and kind of what its condition is and what the risk is. So we hope through that to be able to identify some trees that can be preserved. So we'd rather give people the peace of mind that, you know, that they can keep their tree up and it's not going to be a huge risk, rather than having people take the tree down because they can't really afford to pay for the arborist assessment, or, you know, they just are fearful that it's going to fall. So we're hoping to be able to preserve some of the larger trees through that. Let's see, we're going to be working with Public Works to replace about 35 trees along main corridors, mostly trees and tree wells, like along Malala Avenue, 7th Avenue, Beaver Creek. Those trees that had to be removed, we'll be working with Public Works to do stump grinding and then a complete replacement of those trees. And then to touch on something that was mentioned earlier, I think Samantha, you mentioned the tree inventory. So that wasn't shown in your agenda packet, but we've added it to the commission materials for next week. So sorry that we overlooked that in your agenda for NRC, but $2,000 of the total will be going toward to support the tree inventory. And I think that, you know, it's flexible what that, I think we'll see what the needs are and how that money can best be used. But that's what's been kind of set aside. And so I think that just reduces probably the arborist advice piece of it by $2,000 from what you saw. So the arborist advice is going down to, I think, $15,500. And the last small piece is for tree vouchers. So for those few property owners who are going to be required to replace trees, so in our overlay districts, we have a replacement requirement for, you know, if a tree is hazardous and comes down in the natural resource overlay, for example, that tree does have to be replaced per our code and kind of to comply with state planning rules. And so we are going to be, we can't fully waive every tree code for this. So for the folks who are going to face that replacement requirement, we are hoping to offer a voucher to a local nursery where they can go and pick up a native species tree. So we'd be working with the nursery to make sure that this voucher will only be good for a select few types of trees, about a 1/2-inch caliper to 1-inch caliper. And so, yeah, we're hoping to kind of reduce the burden on those folks so that they don't have to go out and find a nursery and figure out a tree and pay for the tree. They can just take our voucher and go and pick it up and not have to pay for it and then get it planted in the ground. Unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to do inspections. We don't have the staff capacity to do inspections and like know exactly where they're putting it and how they're planting it and how they're caring for it after it goes in the ground. But I think we're going to, you know, do our best to provide the information that to support them planting it properly. So I'll stop there and answer questions.
A couple of questions for you, Kelly. One, I'm pretty sure that Friends of Trees does follow up with people who have trees put in. I assume trees that are part of this program that they're facilitating would then be included in that sort of maintenance management check-in.
Absolutely.
So that's a positive thing. It's not like we're just putting it in the ground and who knows if it lives or not, you know.
Right.
There should be some value there. The other question that came up, and I walked through a lot of our urban parks here, and there was a lot of tree fall in some of our parks and a lot of tree removal as a result of that, you know, blocking trails and all of this. Is there going to be a plan to do any restoration within the parks using some of these funds, you know, in a more, say, ecological way, rather than in a landscape design way?
Yeah, I think so. We're planning on treating the city the same as we would treat a property owner. So if it's a tree in an overlay zone, in the natural resource overlay, then we would replace that with the 1/2-inch caliper native tree. So that will, and you know, a lot of our parks like Singer Creek Park, for example, I think a lot of that's in the natural resource overlay. And so those trees we would be replacing with the 1/2-inch caliper to the extent we can. But the $200,000, I think the city commission really wanted that to be for property owners and people in the community. So that's where it's mostly going.
I just kind of wonder who advocates for the parks, unless the parks does internally. You know, some of the trees that fell, like in Waterford Park, were really big specimen trees, and you know, there isn't very much of an understory. All the other disturbance issues and ivy and, you know, things that happen. So any advantage that can be given to those sites would be fantastic, especially if young trees of those species that, you know, would in a less disturbed location would be populating it. So
yeah, I think
all ears on how we can do that, you know, and I don't know what PRAC is doing if they have this conversation as well. But.
I'm not aware of any conversations PRAC is having, but I would add that I think one of the kind of items on our list under other efforts is ivy removal efforts in parks and city-owned property. And I think that's probably more broad than just ivy removal. It probably, you know, would include planting of understory plants, like you mentioned. And Metro has some grant programs that for that, and we've reached out to Metro. So that sounds like probably a good fit. And I think that the parks, what is it called? Not the Friends of Parks, but
Parks
Foundation, that they have accessed some of those grant funds in the past. And so they have experience doing like ivy removal efforts, and so that's probably a good place to start.
Okay, well, if there's any way that we as the NRC can push it a little bit, you know, there's a lot of pieces going on right now, and you know, it'll likely fall in the cracks because, you know, people look at the parks and, oh, that's all natural, and you know, but it's hardly natural. So
I think what I can do on my end, Mike, is just I'm making some notes here. I'll notify Kendall Reed about the conversation we had this evening and the suggestions that you've made. I'd just like to get a little more confirmation from the other members of the committee that you'd like to make a recommendation in that regard.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd see him on the meeting tonight, but I guess
it
didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I certainly second what Mike's talking about, because the parks, there was a lot of damage and a lot of tree loss. And I mean, I'm on Oregon City Chit Chat, which is the local Facebook group, for better or worse. But after in the month following the storm, there were countless people posting about how horrible it was that so many trees had fallen and then were taken out of the parks, and they were hoping that the city was going to replace those trees. So, you know, I think that it's the citizens of Oregon City, I think, want the trees in the parks back, as well as the street trees that we lost. So somehow making sure that parks don't get left out, that the, you know, just for street trees. I mean, it needs to be, I think, spread out a little bit. So.
Okay. And I think.
And then just to add to this issue, I was also wondering if it's a safety concern, just because we're approaching wildfire season here. And, you know, because of the 2 devastating storms, we sure as hell have a lot of fuel on the ground. And I wonder if it just wouldn't be in our best interest to protect properties to remove fallen trees and do a full restoration. And if we considered it that way, if that might open up other sources of funding.
So the comment is, could this funding include removal of trees on the ground that are dead fuel for potential fires.
Precisely.
And is there extra money for that? Because I know the state has money for wildfire prevention, and they're really pushing that right now, given the drought we're having. And so if we could tap into some of that money to work with that and remove those dead trees and plant new live young trees, that would be.
Yeah.
And what are the grant programs that you're aware of that might do that?
I was just on a site yesterday that was talking about them, and I can't remember
Okay.
anything, but let me look it up. I'll write a note.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll follow up on that. We don't need to discuss the specifics of the program now, I guess.
I do want to say that one of the things that was in the packet was the content for the utility bill insert, so that all of the citizens, because everybody gets water, so that would be in there. I think that's really great because, that telling people that we're not going to fine them for cutting down street trees if they had to cut down, and that if they need help assessing a tree, that they can contact the city and they can send somebody out. Because I know my neighbor across the street, he had 3, I think they're sugar maples. I don't know. I've got one too, and mine had damage, but not as bad as his. 2 of his were just severely damaged, and he's a young guy with a baby, and they cut down what they could, but 2 of his trees are just really severely damaged, and I honestly don't know whether one of them can be saved at all. And so I think it would be something that he would be really interested in, having somebody come and look at that. So I really appreciated seeing that.
His car got crunched too.
Yeah, one of the trees landed completely on his car. So it was a bad thing. And then he ran away when we had no power for 9 days. He at least ran away for about the first 4 of them, because, with a baby, it's like, I noticed he got gas put to his house last month. So
does it make sense possibly to show the web page where we're asking folks to tell us to submit information about their trees, or have you all already seen that?
I've seen it because I had to go submit a report because I cut one of my street trees down after the ice storm. So, but I don't know if anybody else has. So,
yeah, let's show that. That's a good idea.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so we have some kind of links to information here, but really what we're asking people to do is give us their contact information, their address. If they know species and size, they can give us that. A lot of people have been typing in lots of other information and explaining exactly what's going on and what their questions are, and asking for help for, getting it out of the street. I think our public works department has done a really good job responding every time we've got a request of, trees down in the right of way or on the sidewalk. And then people can attach a photo of the trees as well. We're not requiring photos. So it's kind of an honor system, right? So if people submit here and tell us that their trees were damaged and they removed them, or the trees fell down on their own, then we're not, we're taking their word for it. So it's a bit of an honor system, but that's kind of the best we can do with the staff and resources that we have. And then of course, we'll have their contact info. And so we can follow up with the folks that are in the overlay zones and work with them to get the required permits and the tree replacements. And then everyone will also be followed up with regarding the Friends of Trees program when it begins in the fall.
Yeah, I filled that out. So I realized, I knew I was supposed to do it a couple of months ago, and I finally went, I need to do that. So I went in and did it. Like, okay, I don't know what the DBH was, but there's we cut it, there's still about a foot of the stem. So I went up and took the DBH of the stem that was left, and it was 8. So I figured it was probably about 6 where I cut, where, you know, DBH would have been about 6. So it was an estimate, but yeah.
Well, how many folks have we had use that site, Kelly? Do you know? I haven't taken an account.
Yeah, I think back at the end of March, it was something like 60 or 70 submissions, but they've been trickling in since then. So I'd say we might have 80 or 90 submissions now. And then some of those are like multiple trees, right, that came down. So quite a few, but, you know, because we haven't done a citywide mailing yet, I don't think a lot of people know about this online form. As soon as we send that utility bill insert, I think, you know, we're going to direct people to this so that they can fill it out. And then we also plan on putting an insert in the fall issue of Trail News. So maybe, you know, if people missed it on the utility bill insert, or if they, you know, just need a second reminder, then they'll get it in the Trail News.
I get my water bill electronically, so there aren't inserts. So,
you know, my understanding is that it will show up in your electronic water bill as well. That it's somehow inserted into that, and so when you open up the email or the attachment or however it comes, you'll see that. And I think maybe we just don't do a lot of inserts these days, and so that's probably.
I use AutoPay, so I don't see anything.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
Idea.
So that's why we're doing the Trail News.
If there's any kind of a mailing list, that would be great too. Like
if there's some kind of what?
A mailing list to sign up on, just as a backup, because electrons are free, so you know it doesn't cost you guys anything. Just a suggestion.
John has his hand up, so I think he wishes to say something.
Good evening. Sorry, I was thinking I keep thinking this meeting starts at 7, so I'm sorry I'm late. And I also rushed out of the office for a different reason and went and left my computer at home. So I'm on my cell phone. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, looking good there.
Okay. So it's good information, Kelly. Thank you a bunch. And I just want to express the value of the work that the planning department is putting into, you know, the tree issues and the Friends of Trees. You know, that has been such a successful program, and just a lot of good things going on there. And I think this money that we have that is being proposed here is money we need to value and think about. And I just hearing some of the comments from you members of the NRC in that balance between street trees and other trees that might be in parks or in parkways or in things like that. And I just can't. So I don't know if, you know, it's kind of been in the news, this question about street trees and damage to sidewalks. That falls a little bit more on, it's kind of a shared effort between engineering and planning, or public works and planning, because their street trees are, you know, a development requirement, and you know, are thought to be, you know, better for the environment and the right thing to do when you're building a subdivision, as opposed to just allowing it to be open space. But they also have impact on sidewalks, and I do a lot of kind of evaluation and just walking, and you know, I get paid to think about these things, so I do think about it a lot, both on my free time and in my paid time, as I wander around our neighborhoods. And one of the things that I'm starting, so by the way, August 10th, I think we've got a work session on with the City Commission on this, on what I think the commission is asking for, or I know what they're asking for, but I think what we're trying to produce for them is a street tree and sidewalk assistance program because, as you probably all know, the sidewalks that front your property are really your responsibility. And it's always been that way. That's the way our code reads. It's pretty clear, but a lot of people don't know that. And then with questions about street trees and planter strip widths and things, like that result in damage, I think the commission is listening to the community when it comes to, hey, we need some help with some of these costs associated with replacement of a street tree and repair of the sidewalk. And so in thinking through that, I've been pressing a little bit with the planning department, and I wanted to reach out to the NRC to start talking about the value or the value of those street trees. And I appreciate the fact that this committee is so solid with regard to tree expertise. I picked that up from the few meetings that I've been on. And I guess I'd like to kind of start that conversation about, we spend so much money on street trees. And I don't mean that just from the Public Works Department. I mean, as a community, right? Whether it be the developer building the street tree, or not building the street tree, planting the street tree in the planter strip, to, maintaining those. And then, they, for the most part, we're seeing a 20-year lifetime. And then those street trees start becoming problematic. And then they start pushing and moving sidewalks. And, yes, we've moved to wider planter strips, and we've moved to root barriers. I'm not convinced that those are much more than delay tactics, to be honest with you. I mean, time will tell on some of those, because we don't have a 20-year or 25-year life with root barriers. But my point is, we spend so much money, and I mean, this money that we're spending, I agree, some of it probably ought to be pointed at those other spaces that really you'll get a lifelong tree in, right? Where you can plant a tree that'll be there for 100 years, as opposed to a tree that's really got a 20-year life. It may have limited value with regard to shade and the kind of the value that we typically place on trees, because they don't do well, right? Some do really well. And when they do really well, the life, in a lot of ways gets shorter, because they've done really well. They've thrived and grown, accelerated growth rate, but they're in this confined space, and they start moving the sidewalk, and we don't have anywhere else to put the sidewalk. So it's either, you get into this sidewalk or street tree battle, or you lose the tree, and the sidewalk in the process is damaged. And so at the end of the day, what I see is people get frustrated after the sidewalk is damaged. Then they finally cut the tree down. They may or may not put the tree back, but we lose all that 20, 25 years of growth, and we've got sidewalks that are damaged. And so I'm kind of struggling and working through that with, internal conversations in the city. When I look at, there's only so much open space. That's part of the problem, right? We only have so much open space. But I totally agree that, if you could focus tree plantings in a park, for instance, the cost for that tree planting and tree maintenance is super low. As opposed to, we talked a little bit about those Malala Avenue trees. I've been watching, those are in tree wells. Some of them had root barriers at the time. If they filled the tree well with a root base, and then trying to get that out of there, or trying to do the sidewalk or the root grinding to make that happen, is quite difficult in a tree well. In a 4x4 or 4x5 tree well, it's just not easy to get a grinder in there to remove that. So we end up trying to dig and cut, and I've been watching some of our street department try and do that. And, they spend hours on that. That's just getting it out. Right. And then trying to get another tree in there and do it with the right way is I bet you we spend $2,000, $2,500 a tree to get those trees in there. We haven't tracked those costs, but we probably should. But I just think, thinking of that, you could spend that on 10 trees in a park, right? Easily. And so, and that tree will last whereas the tree in the tree well is, or in the tree planter strip is not going to last. It's gonna be there. It may last, and then, but you're going to end up with sidewalk problems, and then you're going to either have to compromise your sidewalk or eliminate the sidewalk or do something like that. So I know I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but I just kind of want to emphasize, I do think your point about using some of this money in parks is money well spent and probably a good thing to do. I think the focus on street trees, unfortunately, is for different reasons, I think. But if we looked pretty hard at the value of those street trees, in a planter strip compared to a street tree that's on the backside of the sidewalk, for instance, if we could encourage property owners to do that, I just see them lasting much longer and providing much more long-term value for the community. And with that, I'll see if that raises any ideas from this NRC, if you've got time, Pete.
Well, I think we have time because it leads into our next discussion about street trees. There are some ancillary benefits associated with the planter strip, which have to do with the feeling of separation. This is actually something that talks about in the street tree code. It talks about the separation between the street and pedestrians. Now, that's something that you can provide potentially either through a smaller tree or some other means. That I'm just mentioning that as another benefit. And then the shading that trees provide over the street is a big benefit in terms of stormwater, provided that the trees, don't create a problem that outweighs the benefit, and that's a really difficult thing to weigh all the costs and benefits associated with a street tree.
The trees also help with climate change. They help mitigate climate change by taking up CO2. They also take up a lot of pollutants. So trees on streets potentially could be improving the air quality. Some of the tree apps, we're talking about doing an inventory, and some of those tree apps that are out there will actually calculate the value of the tree based on its mitigating climate change and cooling and heating costs and stormwater retention and stuff like that. So you can actually put in the value, you can actually calculate the value of the tree relative to its ecological and climatic impacts, besides what it costs if we have to replace the sidewalk. So it is a trade-off, and so I think it's really important to make sure that the correct trees go in the right places. And reading about the subdivision up on the hill where they planted the trees that they were supposed to plant, and they're just wreaking havoc with their sidewalks. So I think it points out the need for our next discussion with looking at the street tree list. And I certainly am not a horticultural tree expert, so I don't have a lot to say about what trees should be where, but it was nice to see that there's different trees for different size, the parking strips. So if it's really a small parking strip, it doesn't get a big tree. And if it's a bigger parking strip, it can get a bigger tree, which would do more good. But yeah.
Well, again, if I don't want to come off as not seeing the value of trees and not suggesting that we need shaded streets, I'm just suggesting that putting them in these planter strips. I've been walking other communities that have even wider planter strips. I was in Canby just the other night walking in their neighborhoods, and a lot of their neighborhoods have even wider 12 to 14 foot planter strips. And I was surprised that, still a fair amount of sidewalk damage associated with those. Now they have a few more options because, they can meander those sidewalks a little differently with all that extra space. But yeah, I think my point is we need to get trees. I'm just a little concerned about the way those trees that we plant and the energy that we put into them, how in the long term, the value in my mind is lost, because at 20 to 25 years, they need to be removed. And, you know, there's not another solution, right? Other than removing them. We can maybe delay by grinding sidewalks, or we can maybe delay by narrowing the sidewalk a little bit, but still providing for ADA access. But those are kind of delays when I think if we had a standard that more valued the tree on the backside of the sidewalk, where they don't seem to be as likely to affect the sidewalk, we'd be better off in the long run. I mean, we've already got a huge liability with trees that are going to be that are affecting sidewalks, right? We know this is just one neighborhood. We know they exist all over town. So trying to figure out the balance there, and maybe that's some streets with, you know, curb tight sidewalks, maybe on those, you know, those less traveled ways where it makes sense, and provide a little more space for the tree in the yard. That may be a solution. But I, you know, and I definitely think, you know, capitalizing on our open spaces, our large parks with more trees makes more sense, because those trees do better, they last longer, and they're cheaper to install and maintain.
Mm-hmm.
Samantha.
So I agree completely with John about the costs that he's facing and the amount of work it takes to get trees in and living. And to be honest, having a street tree that lives 20 years on average is actually pretty good in Oregon. The average lifetime of a tree on a street, like in an urban situation, is usually about 17 years, to be honest. And that's like a, you know, urban in the planning sense. So not looking at your suburban developments. So 20 years is actually doing not too bad on average. But yeah, it's a reality, and it's something that we kind of have to pick on a kind of municipal value scale. So it comes at, what do you want it to look like? How are you going to pay the cost of it? So there is beneficial costs that are kind of intangible, just like what Nancy was saying, that you can quantify these days with a good street tree inventory. That will really help you quantify those intangibles, those stormwaters, those carbon sequestration, pollution, mitigation, and so on, as well as shade and aesthetics. And those things you can kind of capture. You can really capture man hours, time, cost of replacing the tree, taking it out, grinding it down. You can really capture those and document it rather easily. So it's kind of a question of what does the community want? And if that's what they want, then how are we going to support that? So if the community is saying we want trees in the right of way, we want them here because that's what the community wants, then we kind of have to see how best we can support it and make it effective and efficient. So one way to try to avoid the conflict between infrastructure and trees is getting to know, what Nancy was saying, the right tree in the right place. And one way to do that is to really get to know your stock provider. So whomever is your nursery, get to know them. Really go visit the nursery, go talk to them, look at the stock, see what options they have. They are very knowledgeable about this conflict, and they have a lot of options available, more so than before. And they have an experience, of course, about those infrastructure conflicts. So they know that, for example, on cherry trees, if you had a cherry grafted onto a Mandrake root stock, that's like a monster root stock that's going to uplift everything. It's going to uplift a building. So they learned that lesson and they're not doing it anymore. So those are the people who have better knowledge than me and understand the conundrum. So John, I would recommend, if you've got a handful of nursery stock providers, ask for a tour, learn about what stock options they have. and what your conflicts are, and get to know. I mean, I'd go with you, and we'd look at trees together, and we'd learn more about what their recommendations would be for these situations where you're having a lot of conflict, that we can then be better educated, have better options, and then have more solutions. So that would be one way to do it. And the other thing is about, this might be a little bit outside the boundary of NRC, but with new developments, a good question to ask would be if we can widen those planning strips, if that's at all possible. Some of the developments I've seen have particularly wide right-of-ways just for the road. And for developments, I mean, do they need a 60-foot right-of-way? I don't know. I think that's not standard or minimal requirements. But if they could squeeze out more of that road space for planning space, then you could then apply the same solution of right tree, right place, best planning methods for getting the right tree into that spot. So yeah, starting with the nurseries would be a good way to get to know what stock options are available, and get to know that way. That's one way to start. But I totally agree with you, John. It's a complicated, frustrating conflict to deal with, and it's not going to be solved with technology or even with fancy trees. It's going to be a kind of way of life for every municipality. But we can do what we can to mitigate it and help support the community. So I hope that answers something.
That helps a bunch, Samantha. And yeah, I might take you up on your offer, because I'm always looking for an opportunity to get out of the office and go standing in an orchard and checking out tree stock. Sounds pretty cool. The other thing that I heard from you that I would, again, encourage, because I think we need as a community to have this conversation, because I can tell you just the sidewalk issue, street tree issue on its own, I'm seeing the writing on the wall. This city has grown to the point where we need an urban forester to help us with the right planting programs, the right, design standards, the right, you talk about a tree inventory, we can do some things using, college interns, or help that way, or maybe through the college programs. I think there's some options there, or grants. I get that, but I mean, really, even to what I'm finding is many cities have, even if it's for a 5 or 10 year period, you've got a forester that helps get your programs off the ground. And so I intend, because I, to be honest with you, I think what the commission's going to land on is something like an assistance program where we, pay customers. Well, that's got some administrative work to it that, again, planning doesn't have the staffing. We've heard that, and Public Works is struggling with that too. And I just feel like it's not a goal for the commission. I don't know how focused they are on it, but hearing from, NRC, the PRAC, maybe even the Transportation Advisory Committee, I don't know, some of those committee folks, to get them focused on the idea, or more focused. You guys, I think I've heard it from you guys already about wanting an urban forester this city's ready for that. And this tree damage thing is a good, indicator of that. And for many other reasons, I think we need one, and trying to figure out how to fund it, and, who manages it, and how to recruit. I'm starting to look at that. I'm just because I'm, kind of being forced to with this sidewalk street tree issue.
Well, I really appreciate everything you said, Samantha. You covered every point that I was going to make and more. And I totally agree with everything that John's saying too, because I also appreciate the fact that you said, that this is something that we're going to be living with probably in perpetuity, and we need to be prepared for that. So we need best practices. We need to be able to, you know, as a community, figure out what the best solution is. So yeah, I echo that. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I second the city forester plan. I think everybody on this committee has been wishing for that for a number of years. So yeah, well, what can we do to make that more likely to become a reality? Pete's laughing.
I'm not laughing. I have a lot of ideas.
Good. Maybe the next agenda, we should put that on there.
You guys, you know, we have our own little advisory recommendation form that we can use and forward along. And just to let your elected and appointed officials know informally as individuals as well. But I know that the city commission is discussing this idea. I just don't know how on the burner it is because they're so busy with other things. So,
well, remind them we're Tree City, USA, and we don't have a tree expert in the city.
Well, the requirement for the Tree City USA is to have you guys or a forester.
Point well taken.
So if we have both, we're in like.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say, it really does help. Maybe the commission would be more swayed to prioritize it if we had logistics. So like John's might have information about the cost from Public Works of managing the urban canopy. He could maybe get a snapshot of a couple of years. And then with this, if we could get the street tree inventory done, we would then be able to capture, well, if we apply John's expenses over per tree, we could say it costs this much money per tree, just in the right of way, just in the public properties. So that gives you more tangible, on paper, quantifiable expectation of this is how much work, how much money our urban canopy costs. Here's how many people we have to do it. And we could kind of say we have this capacity need, and you can start mapping it out from there. So that's one way to do it. That's one, I'm sure, Pete, you've got better ideas than that, but I think that we've got some ways to kind of capture it with a little bit of work from the NRC. Mm-hmm. And doing a street tree inventory would probably help.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys have said before that you need to start with an inventory.
Right.
Otherwise, we don't know what we're managing and what we're planning for.
Right. So inventory helps to apply it in a geospatial sense. Yeah.
In that sense. And then you, even if you did it, in a pilot way for a portion of a city or a given geographic area, maybe you can work off of that as well.
Yeah, you could have a sample size.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So I think a street tree inventory would help with the urban forester argument, I would hope.
Yeah. So I think this is just a natural transition into the street tree list, but any other comments on the canopy recovery program for Kelly while she's here?
I think we've given her a lot.
I've made some notes. I'll send them her way. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly.
So should we move on to street trees?
Sure. I was just my PowerPoint was awesome. You should have seen it. I was saying,
You could have it on a flash drive so you could put it in your computer.
oh yeah, if I'd have been on the ball and gotten it done in time, that's what I would have done.
Well, Pete, a suggestion, just PDF it and send it to us after
I will,
the fact.
I will do it. I was actually working off of some presentations that we gave from 2007 to 2009 to various neighborhood associations when we encountered this issue back then, and revised the street tree list in 2013 as a consequence of exactly what we're talking about now. But I think now we have 10 years additional knowledge to look back on what's happened since then. Yeah. So I thought what I'd do is just bring up the list that Samantha sent via email and show it on the screen and just use that as our talking point. And that will be a very direct and focused way for us to discuss this issue. And 1 second. All right. So does everybody see the street tree list?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a Excel spreadsheet with hyperlinks. The hyperlinks were connected to the OSU landscape database, and they changed their website. So all the hyperlinks are now out of date unless they are linked to a different database, such as the nurseries that created some of those cultivars and things like that. Sam, do you want to run us through what you did?
Sure. So I spent maybe like a couple hours looking at these lists. So it's not at all an in-depth, most expertly informed list on my part, recommendation list. So I did want to, so I did edit, I added in bold the species I thought would be good to add. And these were pulled from the Portland street tree list. That was very well done, I felt. And they also had them structured out into different planting sites. So if you had a small site versus like medium to moderately large site, and then, you know, dream size large site. So I made a note on the far left side called remove/hiatus. And I made a note about the street tree species I felt we should either take away at all from the list because it's developed problematic issues in general, or we should kind of just retire it from the list for a little while and encourage planting more diversity. And so you might notice I've singled out a lot of the maples on these lists. So maples tend to be the largest species in whatever variety in any municipality. It's not a surprise. Everybody likes maples. They make good color. There's a lot of variety and options. I think, though, because of the dominance in our urban canopy, it makes sense to just say, we like maples. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. There's just too many, and it creates a vulnerability. And I'm sure Mike and Nancy and others might know that the problem of having a monoculture in a canopy and the large vulnerability it can have. So if you were in areas where you have a pest or a pathogen that's particularly vigorous, it will decimate a canopy in a very short amount of time, creating a lot more work for your public works. So to mitigate that possibility, I think it makes sense to encourage planting of other tree species that are tolerant or resistant. So one of the main ones we're concerned about is for maples is the long.
You can just tell me to scroll down if you want.
If you want to. But mostly I'm just saying we should retire maples because there's too many. And there are pests and pathogens that we anticipate coming our way that will target the maples. So to reduce the experience that I had growing up out of Michigan with the emerald ash borer on the ash trees, it decimated the ash population, which was a significant chunk of an urban canopy within 10 years. So, and it's still going, and it doesn't go away. So,
like Dutch elm disease.
Dutch elm disease, emerald ash borer, also the chestnut blight is still going around. And also out west, we have, for some of the pines, we have beetles. And then for maples, we have the
Asian longhorn beetle, Samantha.
Thank you. Yes, Asian longhorn beetle. I was thinking long-haired, but yes, longhorn beetle. So
there's some cities in New Jersey, they literally cut down every host tree of the Asian longhorn beetle as a preventative measure, which completely decimated neighborhoods because they had planted in such a monoculture kind of way. So that's a big one, and it's probably going to spread through the whole United States.
Yeah.
So in anticipation of that, in hopes to mitigate, we can have a wider variety. And by taking it off the list, it's basically saying you can't plant it. You have to pick something else. So that's why I recommend the hiatus, however we want to word that.
My only concern is that you took the vine maple, which, because it's a maple, but it's the only native tree in those smaller categories, which, you know, it bothers me that there's really no natives in much of anything. The vine maple is really the only native tree.
And that, I understand that. I totally agree.
So,
but it's also going to be a vulnerability issue. So we will still have vine maples in our city. But for street tree contexts, I'm having a different lens of a sense of, is it going to be tolerant to the immediate spot it's located in?
Right.
And you're right, vine maples tend to do
the fact that there's virtually no native street trees. We plant all these non-native little crapper trees, and it that bothers me a lot. So
I understand natives, that
I do
emotional
understand the idea. Yeah.
I understand completely. And I would like it if we could have more natives on these lists. But unfortunately, our human infrastructure is not the ecosystem in which vine maples were adapted to. So we're trying to do the best we can with what we got. And we can encourage planting of more natives in a better spot, like John was saying, where they're going to thrive, they're going to do well. But in these particularly small spots, it's either a tree that's going to live or no tree.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the perspective I'm approaching this is, and I'm happy to have further discussion on that perspective. At any rate, so these are merely recommendations. I took off, I had notes to remove some tree species, particularly those that have been known to cause problems or generally aren't going to be a good option.
Those pears have become major invasive species in the Midwest. Missouri actually was paying people to cut pear trees down and giving them money to replant other species because the pears have just completely taken over everything. So
yeah, and I don't want to say that no pear is going to be an option. Like I was telling John, we should have a good relationship with the nursery that we get stock from, and we should visit the trees. We should know what trees we're going to pick before we even buy them. I mean, I could just go down a long road about picking the right tree, but for these particular trees, I think we can just remove them. I don't think anyone's going to miss them particularly. There are options to choose from as alternatives. So I think we wouldn't, another one I suggested to remove is, let's see, a horse chestnut. That was one that was, it is a lovely tree. It does make a nice specimen, but the horse chestnuts have been problematic for safety
There
issues.
are also major invasive species. There's
Yeah,
horse
that too.
chestnuts coming up all over Forest Park. So
Right. So
I don't think we have any 8.5-foot strips in Oregon City. Maybe.
Maybe in undeveloped right of ways we do.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So there might be other edits we could use. I'm looking
at all the ashes and knowing that the emerald ash borer, it's just a matter of time before it gets here and wipes out all of our native ashes. So I think it's probably, and I think that's more likely to get here before the longhorn beetle, because the ash borer is heading this way rapidly.
Right.
And so I'm not sure it's wise to plant ashes for the same reason as planting maples.
Well, I haven't seen ashes as widely planted as maples. So I wasn't sure if I was ready to throw the hiatus sign on them yet. It would be, if it was a major chunk of our canopy, then I would say, yes, it should be put on hiatus. But if it's not a major chunk, then I would hesitate until I have an inventory that, clearly says, yes, like 30% of your canopy is ash. Then I'd be like, okay, we should plant other things.
However, when you get in any natural areas along streams, Oregon ash is one of the really common species along those creeks. And so if we had ashes in the urban canopy, that could be a jumping, make it easier for the thing to spread. So,
right. So to better protect,
we need to talk about that. Yeah.
Those natural areas. Right. So it's all a mitigation lens for that. So I'm hesitant to put hiatus on ashes just yet because I'm not aware of its prevalence as a street tree.
What native oaks are on the list? I haven't seen the oaks. There we go. Oregon white oak. Okay. Red oak. All right. Yeah. I did a lot of walking around after the frost storm, and boy, the oaks just got really busted up compared to some of the other species. Conifers did great. Hardly any of them broke limbs, but between the maples and the oaks, they were.
And the red oaks were hit much harder than the white oaks.
And the red oaks, some really big ones came down.
Yeah, that was the neighbor that took out our power for 9 days.
That
I got all the wood chips from when they cut it down. I got a bunch of wood chips, so I feel like I'm getting revenge on it.
Was it a yard tree?
It was a yard tree. It was right in their front yard, but it was right next. It was just off the sidewalk in their yard.
So we're losing a lot of those huge specimens. I mean, they are just not going to get replaced in the urban forest.
Right.
Just the nature of humans in the landscape. We're not going to let anything get that big.
Which is part of the larger discussion about a citywide tree code and permitting and regulating trees on private property, private residential property. Which
my neighbor has a couple of young oaks in his street parkway, and they bent way over. I mean, they almost snapped in half as well. So they just were not tolerant. Whereas the ashes on my strip, were fine. It's boinged right up. So. Yeah, it's another consideration. I don't know how common this sort of weather event will be in the future. I'm guessing more and more common just because it's that warm, cold weather interface all winter long that we're getting more and more of. So, be prepared.
Looks like John has his hand up. Hi, John.
I heard a couple comments there that made me think about the regulation or the feeling of need to regulate on private property, and especially with these larger specimen trees that could be something spectacular in the future. When I look at some of the street tree problems that we're dealing with, there's a lot of neighborhoods that still have decent setbacks. And I wonder if the city were to sponsor a tree, a lot of it's got to do with property owners not wanting a tree that they think is going to become a problem in the future. But a lot of people value those trees, those same oak trees that you're talking about that are problematic, or whatever the right species is. I'm not the guy to figure that out. But I just I feel like the community, there's a lot of people just like that aren't maybe not so knowledgeable about trees, but they know they love trees, and they know they love those big trees, and they will plant those big trees in their yards without regulation of them. They might want some help in terms of sponsorship, and I wonder if there's value in taking that approach as opposed to more of a regulated approach.
Well, our Heritage Tree program starts at the biggest, oldest ones and gives people kudos for nomination, and we're accelerating that process as well. So we're approving more of them in the past because we're not conditioning it with an arborist report requirement, which was $400, so saving people money. But as far as encouraging people to do their on-property tree management, we don't have any other incentives as far as I know. Right, Pete?
Right. I mean, the Heritage program is completely voluntary, and it still does burden the property owner who agrees to record a covenant to protect that tree, because it kind of makes it a public tree. So that in itself may prove to be a disincentive if somebody says, well, you're going to slap a covenant on my property. So they have to agree to that. So there's that aspect of it, which I think benefits the community who places value on that tree that's on private property. But at the same time, it's that aspect of the program is not a carrot like the others.
And I think after this ice storm and all the trees that came down, the big trees that came down, and then when we have windstorms, the big trees that come down, I know there are people now in the city who have like a big Doug fir or something who are terrified it's going to fall on their house.
Yeah.
And so I know there are people cutting things down because of fear. I mean, my neighbor and I cut the tree down, the redwood that was in the backyard, behind my house. It was in his yard, but it was also doubled, and one about the same size split about a block away, and half of it landed on somebody's house. And so I'm pretty sure that would have split during this ice storm if we hadn't taken it down. But
one aspect of this that I don't know enough about is what the individual homeowner's insurance will cover in the event of a tree falling either in the abutting right of way or not. I mean, if our code clearly states the abutting property owner is responsible for its maintenance, maybe they can get homeowner insurance to take care of the tree. But then that doesn't necessarily address the replacement side of it. So
I guess my thought, can you still hear me, Pete?
Yeah.
If you look beyond the street trees and into a lot of the established neighborhoods, there are a lot of massive trees. Yes, I think the timing of something like this might, we don't want to do it right after an ice storm, but I think without a regulatory arm or a covenant kind of requirement, that there are property owners out there that aren't afraid of that. They have a childhood memory of a champion tree in their yard that they grew around. They're probably not going to be in those R6 lots with very little yard for a footprint, but we have R10 and bigger still around, and I just wonder if this, is there interest from this group to see the city sponsor those and think about, when we think about kind of sponsorship programs, kind of like what Kelly talked about, or some of the things that I'm thinking about in the future. If we're going to spend tree money, I know we need street trees. I'm not opposed to street trees. I just kind of wonder if we shouldn't split that out a little bit and offer programs that might, again, offer a nice tree and start at the other end, right? You're acknowledging the heritage folks. What about those folks that want to start with a new tree that will become a heritage tree someday, and advocating for that kind of piece of the puzzle as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there needs to be some trust that whoever participates in the canopy recovery program, whoever designates a heritage tree, whoever steps up and takes advantage of what the city is offering, has a vested interest in caring for that tree. We just need to provide the public education and the support and the community will to do that. I'm a big believer in carrots, frankly, over sticks.
I think if we had a city forester, that might be one of the things that they could do, would be to help promote planting of future big trees and to go out and help the homeowner make sure they're planting it in the best place in their yard so it'll get a good solid root ball. And then maybe even be available to come in if something happens and they need pruning or they're worried about it, so that they would have some advice without having to hire an arborist. I think that would be a really, really beneficial thing if we want some big trees.
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to what Sam said about, if we knew the nursery and we knew the sources and we could, get better quality stock, that would necessarily involve a much bigger part by the city for taking over the program and making sure that it was done right, as opposed to right now, which is basically the property owner does everything. They get to select whatever they want and can find. And frequently that is the cheapest, smallest, whatever they get, including a lot of maples, and things like that. So go ahead.
I have some recommendations for down the road. Nothing for right now, but there's the city of Eugene is going to participate in a pilot project with Carbon Cambium, which is an urban forest carbon crediting outfit. And what they're hoping to do is to capture all the carbon currently growing in the urban forest in Eugene, and then mapping out potential. And then I don't know if anyone's familiar with carbon crediting or carbon sequestration credits, but basically Eugene would then benefit from an income source from growing, maintaining their trees. And it would offset the cost of that and also provide opportunity for growing more. So that I can talk a little bit about this in a different time or offline, but that's one way they're hoping to support their urban forestry program, is by going into the carbon market. And that's an incentive that they could then pass on to the private landowner and encourage more growth and maintenance of larger trees.
And that could be on private property as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is all kind of speculation at this point, but they're actively doing this pilot project down in Eugene. So I can keep you all informed about how that goes. But again, Eugene does have an urban forestry program. They have an urban forester. So they're kind of a little bit farther down the road in terms of a program for their city. But I mean, that's one opportunity that they are facing the same question that we are. How do we get private landowners to keep and maintain large trees? But I like the idea that John mentioned about an incentive program, somehow to encourage them either through more education, more information about what benefits they provide, and education programs of that nature is kind of low-hanging fruit, but still takes time and energy to do. And then we also have I'm sure there might be better ones, but I would like to pursue options that we could do now. I'm not sure what they would be though.
Yeah, well, good stuff. I think that combined with the input you gave on the tree canopy program tonight gives us plenty of fodder to talk to the city commission about on June 16th. Yeah.
I don't have anything necessarily to add. I just want to voice support for this idea that's just emerged in the conversation here. I think, John, you kind of touched upon an elegant solution there with finding ways to incentivize planting trees where they can actually survive. But of course, it poses the problem that, this creates a kind of a case-by-case evaluation. So it's all the more reason why we need to bring in an urban forester here. So for whatever it's worth, I'm all on board for that. It might be some steps down the line, but I think we've got a good case from the get-go. That's it. Just want to stack onto that.
Okay.
One thing. So this idea of a street tree sidewalk assistance program. I mean, what we're hearing is there's some agencies that basically help the property owner either through a grant or through a loan to replace sidewalk and a tree, right, associated with that sidewalk repair. And so the funding that has some sustainability concerns for me, but whatever. If that's where the community wants to go, I think I want to support that. But one idea that I had was, and so tell me what you think about this. So I'm just kind of running it by you. So assuming there's a planter strip, a small planter strip. In the case of the Park Place area, I think they're 3-foot planter strips, aren't they, Pete? Is that kind of what we measured the other day?
In general, yeah.
Generally about 3 feet. So yes, there's probably a tree that we could come up with from the tree list, and really liked what I saw there in terms of suggestions. So anything more we can do to fix that would be good. But if there's a property owner who says, look, I've got a space that might do well with a different kind of tree, let's just say a future heritage tree type. I mean, part of me wants to say, look, we'll give, let's just say $1,000 for sidewalk repair and, tree grinding and tree replacement or something like that. But I'm not excited about putting it back in that 3-foot planter strip. I'd really like it to be more on the backside of that sidewalk in the yard where it will thrive and look good. And that may not be every, planter strip, because a lot of property owners won't have that. But, part of me wants to kind of condition this assistance to fix the sidewalk, which is the bigger cost, with some kind of requirement that they put a tree back for sure. Does it have to be in the planter strip, or could it be behind the sidewalk? Is, maybe a little bit of a debate. Well, it's all debatable, but anyway, that's one thing that I want to be able to articulate to the commission, that I'd like to have some kind of accountability. If we're going to give a grant for fixing the sidewalk because of a damaged street tree that's in a planter well too small, then, and we have a willing property owner, will you support that tree even though it's on private property and even though they don't really want to sign a covenant?
Yeah, that option is written in the code currently, but it's not the priority. So we would have to take the priority off of the planter strip in the situation where it's constrained, make a code change, and that's going to be a legislative process, or not, maybe not a legislative, it's an ordinance change. But currently yeah, that option does exist to replant in the yard, but this would be taking it a step further because you're actually promoting that as opposed to making it a lower priority than replanting in the strip. And I think that's open to discussion as well. As long as you can get a long-term bigger tree growing there.
Concern would be that if it's a street tree, they can't just go cut it down. Whereas if they plant it in the yard, they could sell the house 2 years later and somebody could come in and cut it down and they wouldn't have a street tree. So maybe have some requirement that there's some covenant on that tree that if you cut it down, you now have to plant a street tree.
That is the requirement right now. If you do that, if you take that option, you record a covenant that treats it as a street tree. Okay. And we have a template that's on the web that we use for that. And it's pretty popular. It costs to record it. The difficulty is tracking it.
Yeah, well, why we need an urban forester.
Exactly.
And a tree inventory.
All right. Sam?
I was going to ask, and maybe Pete would have an answer, but for property assessments, do street trees have an impact on that compared to on private property? I'm curious about that impact.
The only thing I know about is that study that the City of Portland did, which I think was 2009 or so. It was a hegemonic economic study. How do you say that? I forget. It starts with an H. And it showed that the average value added to the sale price of a home for a tree within 1,000 feet or 100 feet was $7,500. And that was at the height of the market. And there's probably some other studies out there since then.
I know there have been studies outside of Portland. Done that show the same thing, but I've only found that one in Portland.
Yeah. So
because I'd be curious if it mattered, if it was on the private property and having an impact on property assessment that would, boost up somebody's taxes and they'd be hesitant to do that, versus if it was on a street, if it was on a right of way, public property, if it didn't necessarily have an impact on property assessment. But if it's no difference, then I would say like this incentive program would make sense if that assessment didn't pinpoint where that tree was.
Right. So I don't know how it would affect just an assessment for the property owner year to the year. It's the same property owner, but in Oregon, you've got the property tax measures that says you can't go beyond 3% per year unless you sell the property. And then, you can assess it at the higher rate. And that's where that value potentially rolls in, is during the market transaction.
Yeah, I believe that they were looking at the potential property value in terms of sales price for the houses is that Portland one. So it wasn't like the assessed value of the house, it was the actual sales price. Yeah. So if you're going to make more money selling your house, then that would be a good thing.
That study's on our website. We actually posted that. I don't know if it's been downloaded, but
So I do know that when it comes to quantifying the value of trees, especially when it gets into like those kind of soft benefits, the ecosystem services, I know there's been a lot of research into that, and it's been found that they really become optimized around 30 years. So it was actually really distressing for me to hear from John and Samantha that these things have a survivability of 17 years on average, I believe is what you said. So, whatever tack we take, it's totally counterproductive if we can't ensure the survivability of the tree.
That's exactly, yeah. I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I think there are options, to like widening the planting strip, different things you could do with like engineered soils or, creating bump outs for trees. There are creative solutions, but that opens up a whole can of worms. But Yeah,
planting them and getting big
efficient.
planters on those really narrow parking strips, putting big planters up, planting the trees in the planters. So, you know, you just pick the planter up and take it out rather than digging out a tree well. That would be cheaper, I would think, but.
Yeah.
Right. But it's true that despite the relatively short lifespan of a potential tree, it's not nothing.
Right. Sure.
The question could be, do the benefits outweigh the costs? Or do the benefits provide the value that the community wants? And these are more intangible questions that are harder to quantify. So you're right that the maximum peak benefit for these ecosystem services from a generic street tree is not going to be the same as the potential from a tree living, you know, next to a natural area or in a park. So it's kind of, you're putting them together, trying to compare as best you can, but also meeting the needs and values of the community you're in. So it's a lot of ways, it's a human question, less than a plant survivability question.
Well said.
It'd be cool to see some sort of permaculture design that actually had plants of different values that could be really measured, like wildlife habitat values. They wouldn't necessarily be tall urban trees. They might be, they may be shrubs, you know, but they would have way more value than some, you know, ornamental.
Yeah, I walked,
you know.
Exactly. I walked by a couple of houses near me, and they have a combination of natives on one side of their corner lot, and the other side is all strawberries and blackberries and everything else. You know, it's edible on the other side.
These dwarf fruit trees are really cool, you know, and they look like vineyards, you know, the way they grow.
Yeah, exactly. So it was providing that sense of separation. It wasn't a tree.
Yeah. But they're so much more valuable than those stupid ashes I have in my front yard.
So that's another thing to think about, right? So creating more of an ecosystem in the strip as opposed to a monoculture.
Another check mark for the urban forester / ecologist.
Okay.
So do we need to do something about what Sam's done with her list? Should we give it our seal of approval? It's going to go to the city commission to the next meeting. So would it be helpful if we say we think these are good suggestions?
I agree with the logic behind her hiatus trees, and I would say that it's a pending list, pending the tree inventory, when we can actually see what the distribution of species are across the city, and then we might even fine tune it after that.
Would it make sense as part of our recommendation to kind of have it be the hiatus status, have like an automatic sunset in it, so that, you know, if it gets put in force and someone doesn't touch it again, that eventually maples just naturally come back onto the list, and that has to get kind of renewed if we want that delay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the other. Yeah, but I forgot that we also need to be looking at climate change potential. And I should have mentioned that at the very beginning, so I apologize for that. But the Portland list has some climate forward species on it. And I don't know if we have looked at that in any detail yet. So
you add those, Sam?
We might need to table this and come back and talk about climate.
I saw a lot of sorry to interrupt you, Pete. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Mm-hmm.
So I was going to say, when I did the comparison between the Portland street tree list and ours, there was a lot of correlation. And they did a really great job looking at different ecosystem types in water regimes and shade tolerances. So I feel like we don't need to reinvent that list. We're not too far from Portland. We might have some unique ecosystem types that would be good to evaluate. But yeah, I did find a lot of cognates on both lists. So there's some.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should also mention we already do allow trees that are on regional street tree lists to be planted in our strips if it's appropriate for the strip. So that's something that we already allow.
So if we did take maples off the list, if somebody found them on a Portland list and wanted to plant one, we would still say okay.
Nope.
No,
that's
so
a very good.
On list.
I think. Well, that's a good question. I think that's something that we need to be clear about. I think what we do defer to is a certified arborist recommendation. But if we come out and say that we shouldn't be planting maples at all anymore for the time being because of they're overplanted and overrepresented, then we should probably remove them from the list or for the time being, because we can always update the street tree list in the future.
Yeah.
One way to phrase the caveat is when we do an inventory and we do the inventory again 10 years, 20 years down the line, we can re-measure that population. And if we see that maples are now like 20% or 10%, then we could say they don't represent the large percentage of our canopy. We could then put it back on the list as an option. But then we'd have to like revisit that number again in the future about vulnerable species and relative population in the total canopy, so that we don't come to this situation again of over dominance of a single species of variety. So it's not a never question, it's a when is a good time.
Yeah, and the good thing is that the street tree list is a resolution. It's not an ordinance. It's not a legislative process and so it doesn't have to go through that exhaustive zoning review type thing. It's something that, like the street tree code itself, can be amended by resolution. So that's good. It's a little more nimble to change. All right. Well, I'm glad this is being recorded. It's a lot of stuff we've covered tonight.
So do we want to approve the minutes from July 8th of last year? They're at the end of the packet or close to the end of the packet.
Those are the only ones I've gotten so far.
I glanced through it, and from what I could tell, I'd say, yeah, it was fairly accurate in terms of what we did. So
we've got the recording too.
Yeah. You probably should approve some of these.
I was there.
You were there.
Yeah, it looks good.
And I think those were the only people that were there.
Just you and I.
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, Devin. Devin was there. Devin's name's on there.
Sorry, Devin.
Third approval.
All right. We'll call that good then.
Sounds good. Do you want to vote on it or just say we're good?
No.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay. Great. Communications.
Oh, fun stuff.
I have something. In case you didn't remember, we nominated Dee Dee for the Heritage Tree Hero, and she did receive the award. And she was also nominated apparently by Doug Neely, separate from us.
Good for her.
But she got the award. We had talked about maybe awarding it at this meeting, because we have to give her the award and they're going to come and permit, and it's going to be a big to-do. And then she's out of town. She was going on an extended vacation. Yay, Dee Dee. So we had talked about maybe doing it at the July meeting. So putting that on the agenda for the July meeting. And Sam, I need to get the name of the person I need to call because I can't find that note anymore. My house is a complete disaster right now between everything going on at school and work and here and research. I'm just like, oh. So I just need that person's name. I'll email you and so you can send me it. But then I got to verify with Dee Dee that time works. But then we get on the agenda and get them on the same agenda. So, but that's going to be awesome. I'm just really happy that she won because she deserves it more than anybody. I think just about every heritage tree in the city right now owes its status to Dee Dee. So,
sure.
Who's continuing to come up with more.
Okay, we will remember to invite Kendall Reed as well to the next meeting. If he can make it, I hope he can.
Yeah.
I'll put it in his calendar as an invite so it doesn't fall off the table. What else did we want on the future agenda? Invasives. We want to talk about that.
The invasive species list. Can we really quick look at what Chris did?
Yeah. I was going to pull that
awesome.
up.
Cool.
That's
That was
really
cool.
awesome.
I didn't know if we wanted to table that for next month or not. Sorry, I got the message kind of late.
I know, but we might want to talk more about it. I don't know if we want to talk about it tonight, but we really need to look at it. It's gorgeous. I mean,
let me pull it up here.
Well, thank you.
I wasn't sure it was referring to plants or, aliens.
I love it. It's like the creature from the Black Lagoon.
With the spaceship elevator.
Maybe more ivy on the elevator would be great. Just kind of all
the way around,
developing it.
Maybe there's the green stuff kind of to the left, like in the background, that green. If that looked more like Himalayan blackberry.
Yeah.
So it was just, noticeably 5-leaved Himalayan blackberry. That would be my only suggestion as to how to improve it, because I just think it's awesome, though.
Believe me, I try to get the blackberry. It was at the top of my list. The only reason it's not on there is because it wasn't convenient for me personally. I couldn't find the right graphic for it.
That's
so
forgivable,
good.
Yeah.
But really, my big concern about this is that I am, in fact, like the substantive part of it is I want to make sure that I'm directing people to the right source of information.
Right.
I looked into, a couple of sources for, just how individual homeowners might approach, removing and replacing invasives and just how to ID them. And Solve Oregon, for my money, seemed to be the best that I could find.
Okay.
But I'm, does anybody have any other suggestions as to where we can direct people?
I don't know.
Does the city have ordinances about invasives on your property? And maybe we should have a link to that too. So
we have a very outdated nuisance code section about blackberries being cut down and noxious plants being removed, but it's not super up to date. And so if somebody complains about noxious weeds or nuisance plants on a neighboring property, we will send code enforcement letter informing them about it, and hopefully they voluntarily comply.
Right.
We also send them resources that go to the WeedWise program for the Soil and Water Conservation District. And the district has actually been very helpful. It's just that when it's such a small patch of weeds on a private property, they generally can't do anything themselves. They can just say, this is how you take care of this. Mm-hmm. It's really big infestations where the district, can get involved and make a difference.
No, I'd hate to make it too heavy-handed and suggest that you could be reprimanded if you.
No.
Right.
That's not what I'm suggesting.
Responsibility. Yeah.
No.
It's just if there was a city website, even with, but yeah, it's almost like we need to come up with something that besides this is awesome, but come up with something where, and I'm the first to admit that I dropped the ball on this one. I went and looked at the list once and then promptly got sidetracked. But make sure that list is up to date.
When we
and
update
we were
the
talking
invasive
about
list, we can put that,
ranking the worst, maybe the 10 worst, and having like on the website could have pictures of what they look like.
Right.
So that people could say, oh, that's what I've got. Because most of my neighbors who have invasive species have no idea they're invasive. Half the people in my neighborhood have Italian arum growing in their front yard.
Yeah.
And I just want to go pull it all out, but it's like,
yeah, so similar to
now, so you know.
Similar to the street tree list, we could have URLs that link to current photos and information about that.
Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
Is this going to be a paper insert? Is a question first, and then a suggestion.
That was actually my other big question to the group, is like what the distribution of this is going to be. Because the whole genesis of this is that, you know, we had a concerned resident from the Kenema neighborhood.
Right.
Who wanted some way of informing his neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And we came up with the idea of, you know, producing a graphic, but how exactly is this going to be distributed?
Yeah.
Should make like flyers and post
utility bills are always a good way to do it. Trying to get a trifold potentially, or John,
get some flyers and post them in local restaurants and bars and coffee shops so people walk in, because this isn't attractive. People would want to put this. Heck, I'd flame that, put that poster up. You know what I mean? You can make money.
Like the idea of flyering.
Well, I think we really need a customized website that has our invaders and with some serious suggestions on what you can do, and if you need help, and who's there to help you if it's difficult for you. I mean, I don't know who you can get to help, you know, short of hiring somebody, spending money.
And there are some elderly people who can't do much of anything, who don't have any money, and so yeah.
So I mean, the Solve Oregon's great. I mean, but it's a pretty diffuse site, and you know, I was just thinking, wow, if we could even have a demonstration weed garden, you know, to show people what these weeds are. I could do a temporary.
I used my neighbor's yard, but they actually went and cut them all down. So
you know, you could go to Waterboard or some of the parks and just have a little, you know, numbered posts, and we can set it up for a weekend, and people can walk it and learn what these different weeds are. You know, it's pretty easy to do. You know. I'm just saying, if you're going to catch their attention, then where does it go? You know, enough to motivate me to start digging weeds out of my driveway or not?
Well, I'd like to take this, Chris, and talk to Kristen Brown, our communications coordinator. John's got a couple ideas, or a few ideas. What were you going to say, John?
Well, a couple things. I'm looking at this on my phone, so I can't tell the detail, but it looks super cool to me. And by the way, Public Works manages the elevator. So, you know, I don't want to send the wrong message about how, you know, lack of maintenance on the elevator, but this is super cool. So Chris, good job with that. I mean, I think it does lend itself well to kind of a flyer that, you know, because I think people will pick it up. My question was, is there content on the back side of it that you might include that would be informational? You know, this kind of thing we do usually in the summertime, kind of a color insert into the trail news for just where we're doing paving projects. I know that you can ask, or we can pay for a color insert into the trail news, but I would only do that with this kind of a graphic. If you had like page 2, which would be on the back, that would have, you know, what's the right messaging here that is about invasives, and I think a front and back would be really well received. We hear a lot about trail news and the fact that folks use trail news and read trail news, so I think that's good. And then if you could also convert that into a flyer that you could, you know, I mean, the library would pick up on it. I don't know if they've got any books that are fun for kids to read about, you know, but maybe, you know, a book of the month kind of a thing. And, you know, there's just seeing that, Chris, inspires a lot of cool ideas, I think. But that would be my suggestion, would be trail news in a color. So you might want to talk to Laura about that. I don't know what we pay for that, but it's probably worth it, because invasives in Oregon City are, whether it be Kanema, as was discussed at your last meeting, or other places in Newell Canyon, they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Might I also suggest that we could even put a QR code on here so that people could do a quick scan and it could direct them to all of the sources that they need.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and that would be in addition to page 2, like you said, John.
I think page 2 should be maybe what we were talking about, like a photo of, pick the top 5 or 10, whatever we could fit on the backside, and have a photo of it, and then maybe a little bit of a description of I don't know what we'd put in there, but how to get rid of it, or
whether you could use vinegar or a flamethrower.
Yeah, flamethrower for the Italian Arum. But yeah, we could. I mean, just I think that would be a good thing to have on the backside. Would be more details about each one of the worst of the worst species, and then we could have. We really need to have an updated part on the city website with pictures of these species, and besides just the list, which I look at the list and some of them I don't know what they are, because I don't know. I may have scientific names, but I don't know the species name of a lot of these things that are, and a lot of the ones on the list are kind of minor. They're really random. You find maybe one here I find one in my yard every 20 years. So it's like, we really need to focus on the really bad ones and what they look like and how to get rid of them. And so, that would be nice to have on the website. We could have that whole list, but then you went to it, you go, these are the worst of the worst. And if you really want to see the list of everybody, you can, but without pictures, nobody's going to know what they are anyway. So
I should probably point out that I made a giant assumption that it's just okay to use a third-party source for information here. Chances are, if we put their information on something, then they would want to consult on it and have a chance to just kind of to brand it as well. Right, would be my guess. So I mean, if we could keep this in house, I mean, if we just made our city website beefier, for this content, all the better.
Right.
But if we're looking for something short term, and work through something like Solve Oregon, then we would have to consult them.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it'd be better to have that stuff on our website anyway. So I mean, I'm willing to, Chris, you want to sit down and work, I'm willing to work with you, and Mike can weigh in, we all can weigh in on like what we think the worst of the species are, like what we were supposed to do already, but which you didn't do. So come up with those worst species and then start coming up with pictures and text, and we can run that by the committee. We can email that out to everybody, at least each little section plant, and see what they think. But this is awesome. I was stoked when I saw that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Hey, Pete, is the only resource on the website for the city the nuisance plant list? Is that it? For information?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we need to improve on that.
One idea, I really liked Mike's idea about a weed tour. That'd be really cool to set up, and we could even do a video of it. Yeah. But another kind of low, not so hard to do, is have a slideshow of pictures on a website that just flips through them. So it can show you pictures of the arum, it can show you pictures of the blackberry or the ivy, or knotweed or whatever, and then it labels it, and it has a really good picture, and then it just goes through it and cycles through it, so people can see what those top 10 worst weeds are. And then some
of them show it like when they're blooming and when they're not blooming and when they're going to seed, because they look very different at different stages too, so you could have all 3 pictures on one slide.
Right. So it's basically just be a slideshow that just cycles through automatically, that when they visit the website, and I'm sure there's a number of website widgets that can facilitate that sort of thing. but that would be one way we can beef up the website. But I like the idea of having something more engaging with a tour.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool. I'd be happy to help with that.
Cool.
Whenever I walk, I do iNaturalist, and it's pretty much a weed tour.
Yeah.
I mean, I really look high and low for natives. But.
Weed garden of the week.
Yeah.
I don't know if
we could do
we wouldn't be very popular in that case.
Crap garden in front of the city hall.
We won't say anything about that garbage. Good money.
Oh dear.
All right. Well, good.
Hey, P, I need to sign off. It was good listening, folks. We'll catch up next meeting.
Thanks for joining us,
Appreciate
John.
the input, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. All right.
Dan, didn't you have something else for future agenda items?
I was just talking about inventory strategy, like kind of putting some meat to that idea, making some plans, and how we kind of want to approach it. Just we need to start the conversation if we're going to do a pilot.
Right. Can we also put on there for next time maybe something about the idea of an urban forestry position?
Sure.
And a more
like roles and
Why don't we draft a job description?
Sure. And a pay grade?
Exactly.
They get yelled at a lot. I'm sure everybody at the city does, but I've got a friend who just recently was promoted, and she was interim urban forester in Corvallis, and it's not a cushy job.
It's not an easy job. No,
it is a hard job.
Yeah. All the more reason to have a solid code.
Well, if we define, I mean, seriously, if we define the position and we graded it competitively, then we kind of know what our budget is that we're shooting for. And so as we begin to advocate for how we fund it or how the city funds it, we can be more.
Yeah, we'll know more.
Otherwise, you end up lowballing or you end up having half-time positions, which frankly, I just hate half-time positions. I mean,
right. Yeah.
No,
it would need to be a full-time for sure.
Yeah, because it's going to be 2 FTEs of work.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be working very closely through code enforcement too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just as a practical matter. So part of the code enforcement department is going to be taken up with this new responsibility as well. But the job of coordinating across departments is what I would hope the position was created to do, and to give them the authority and tools they need to be able to coordinate those departments. So yeah. Right. Okay.
I have a couple more items just for good of the order. So OCT is going to have an urban and community forestry conference on September 14th and 15th. And invitations are coming out soon, but registration is open for early bird registrations. And topics are going to be on water wise and strategies for the future for street trees and the interaction with water. So I'm actively recruiting speakers on the topic of ice storms, as well as flooding, as well as drought, and future water regimes and what we can expect. So it might be interesting for everybody here. I think it would be valuable, of course, for anybody who has any professional licenses related to urban forestry or arbory. And so credits would be available for those folks. But as a Tree City USA, they automatically get invitations. And there are discounts for people in our positions who are on the tree boards for Tree City USA. So everybody here is invited. I can share the link for that, but that's in September. Also, in December, when OCT has our last quarterly meeting, I'm tentatively hoping to invite the board to come to Oregon City. We will have our first in-person meeting since the pandemic in September down in Talent, but then we don't have a plan yet for December. So if we don't go to the first location that was recommended, I recommended OC as the second recommendation.
Thanks for doing that.
So I thought we'd have a number of topics they'd be interested in learning about, and they would bring a lot of knowledge here as well. So there's a lot of potential for questions and answers. And usually anytime we did an in-person meeting, we had a seminar or a tree pruning class in advance of the meeting, taught by one of the members of the board. And that would be for public works or volunteer members of the community. So opportunities to interact with OCT are open if it's of interest. And I don't know what city policies are right now or expect to be in December, but just putting it on your radar.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Send me the information so I can send it to Kristen Brown and we can get it linked through the Facebook and Nextdoor.
Samantha, please send it to me as well. I think just about everybody in my office will be interested in that, especially if there is a potential for continuing education credits. Yeah, please do.
I like the idea of the pruning workshop again, because that could tie nicely in with the stuff that we're going to be doing with the urban canopy recovery.
I have something, Pete.
Yeah.
This is real short notice. I had planned to announce it last month, then I forgot to send it to you. But the Environmental Learning Center at Clackamas Community College puts on a series of professional workshops. Over the last year, we've been doing it via Zoom, obviously. So we have one coming up on, get this, invasive plant ecology, taking the long view is the name of it. It's a 3 half days of Zoom, and then there's a field trip that's optional because obviously because of COVID, but there's a student price of $140 and a professional price of $350. And it's being, you do get 1.5 credits through the community college. And it's, the instructor is George Kroll, who I don't know if you guys have heard of him or know of him.
No.
He's 35 years in the field. He's a field forester and has been involved in a lot of restoration projects all over the Pacific Northwest. And he taught it last year and it was really popular. And we already have 25 students this year, but we obviously with Zoom, we can do a lot more. So if anybody's interested in that, I can send Pete or I can send all of you guys the email announcement, but it's next week. So it's kind of short fuse on this.
Great. Yeah. Please do send me that. Anyone else have any announcements? Okay. My announcement is the OC 2040 Vision Forum. And we have a draft vision statement. There's been a lot of comments given, and we've given presentations the last 2 nights running, actually. So the idea is that June and July, the Vision Forum online is live through the 21st. So please do go there to survey. It's in Spanish as well. And then all the input we get through that site will go into a draft vision statement for adoption in early July. And then we actually start in on the plan. Update finally. So it's a 2-page vision statement consisting of 4 topic areas. And I think I sent you guys that link, right? Okay. We extended it 1 more week because it took us a while to get the Spanish version online. So now it's through the 21st. Yeah, so that's going on. And that's all I have.
Anybody else have anything? Well, should we end the meeting?
I don't know. Sure.
Okay.
Thanks for participating, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had great discussions tonight. So yeah.
Really good.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we'll be on YouTube. So I'm going to make sure that I don't do anything wrong. But thank you. And I guess we're adjourned, right?
Yep.